Welcome to the Food and Beverage Processor Forum, brought to you by Food and Beverage Ontario. I'm Dyson Wells.
And I'm Chris Conway, CEO at Food and Beverage Ontario.
Today we're diving into a subject that meets at the intersection of both our personal and business lives. Money. Specifically financial well-being. Why is this so crucial? Studies indicate that financial concerns are the primary stressor for Canadians, overshadowing work, personal health, and even relationships. In fact, 40% of working Canadians report feeling overwhelmed by their debt levels. Nearly half have lost sleep due to financial anxieties, and 44% would struggle to meet their financial obligations if their pay was delayed. What's more, over half of our working population acknowledges that personal financial worries affect their work performance, leading to distractions and diminished focus. This kind of stress doesn't just weigh heavily on people. Businesses feel the impact as well, with potential productivity losses that could amount to over $200,000 annually for a company with 200 employees. Additionally, financial stress doubles the likelihood of reporting poor health and quadruples the odds of experiencing sleep issues and other health-related problems. Yet, there is a silver lining. Employees who invest in their workers' financial well-being see tangible rewards. A financially secure workforce tends to be more productive, has reduced absenteeism, and generally boosts morale. Such proactive measures by employers can also bolster recruitment and retention efforts. Interestingly, a significant majority of employers, 73%, and 70% of employees, believe that it's the employer's duty to support employee financial well-being. Moreover, a whopping 84% of employees express interest in workplace financial education programs. In the first segment of our episode, we'll discuss the advantages of promoting financial literacy and security among employees and the steps businesses can adopt to make a difference. Joining us for this conversation is Kevin McCarthy, Head of Corporations and Institutions at EnRiched Academy. In the latter half, we'll pivot to discuss the broader financial well-being of businesses in the food and beverage processing sector. For this, we'll bring in Matt McDonald from MNP. As the national leader of MNP's food and beverage processing practice, Matt will shed light on the strategies businesses could employ to promote financial stability and growth, as well as protect itself from financial risks, both seen and unseen. It's an episode packed with invaluable insight for both employees and business owners. Stay tuned. Joining us on the pod today is Kevin McCarthy. Kevin is the former Chief of Staff to Jim Flaherty, a past director with Scotiabank, as well as a former Senior Advisor at Foresight Strategic Advisors. Today, Kevin is Head of Corporation and Institutions at EnRiched Academy. They provide financial education through online training courses and live events that focus on fundamentals of effectively managing money, spending, and investing. So a perfect guest to have on the show today while we talk about money, and rest assured I had thought about it a lot. We would have done our introduction with some Pink Floyd, but I don't think we can afford the rights to that. But we'll see what we can do. So welcome to the show, Kevin. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great. And before we started recording here, and also while I was researching, I had to ask you about it, because we were researching and we saw that you did get a new agreement with the government of Manitoba. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, I was out in Winnipeg. We signed a new agreement with the government of Manitoba for our high school program. We've got we'll probably get into this, but we've got a high school, middle school, elementary program, as well as programs for adults and post-secondary. But so next year, up to 1,500 students in Manitoba high schools will be using our financial literacy program to help them learn about the basics around money. So very excited about that. That makes 3 provinces, where we're in Alberta and in Prince Edward Island, and we're in Ontario, where I live. We've got 20 school boards directly that we're working with. So last year we had 170,000 students using our program, which is pretty exciting, because when I speak to an audience, I often ask how many people learn about money in high school, and I barely ever have a hand go up. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always cringe when we start talking about money, because I feel like I didn't get that proper education, and a lot of the time it feels like you're just kind of learning as you go along. I always joke about going into the bank whenever I have to talk to him, and my advisor, he turns into a teacher, because it's basic things he'll try and talk to me about, and I'm like, you need to explain it. And you've got a lot of students that you're working with, a lot of employees that you're working with to try and give them that understanding, that basic foundation for financial well-being. So I'm wondering, what is that gap that's going on right now? Is there like a lack of understanding right now in the general population on understanding financial, well, I guess with financial literacy?
yeah, look, Dyson, I think there's a significant gap. I think if you ask the average Canadian, they will acknowledge they have a significant gap. We started off focused on teaching high school kids about money, but we suddenly realized that there's a much bigger need out there, and that's the adults. Because a big part of the reason that kids don't know about money is that their parents don't know about money, because none of us were ever taught. We're taught about Shakespeare, we're taught about calculus, and I'm not knocking those, but dealing with money is something 100% of people have to do. It doesn't matter what career you're in, you're going to have to deal with money, and it's something you have to deal with every single day. So there's a significant education gap, and what that leads to, I mean, Dyson, you're not. I hear this all the time. Why didn't they teach this in high school? Why didn't I learn this? Why am I? Because unless if you didn't get it taught in high school, and if your parents weren't able to pass this on, you're on your own. You're trying to figure this out on your own. And some people are effective at doing that, but the majority of Canadians aren't. And then there's the other factor in this, is that there's a real stigma as well around not understanding money. People feel embarrassed about it. They feel like, I should know this. I feel like these are basic things I should know. But if you haven't been taught it, haven't taken the time to learn it, it's not surprising. But that embarrassment, I think sticks around. And a big part of what we try to do at EnRiched Academy is make the language of money and the topic of money simple. And we also try to take some of that stigma out, because it's not your fault if you haven't learned this. This is an education piece, and if you haven't been educated, you can't be blamed for it.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I'm glad. Thank you, Kevin, for making me feel less alone.
Yeah, well, you really are. You're not alone. The majority of Canadians, I think, fit. Again, we have teachers that teach our program that tell us, "Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much teaching my students." Again, because they weren't taught this. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the goal is obviously to build that financial well-being. And keeping in mind for our purposes, when we're talking about financial well-being, we may be talking about listeners. I wouldn't know, right? We may have people who are higher ups in food and beverage processing industry who also feel like they need to brush up on their financial literacy. But for the bulk of this, I think we're going to be talking about the employees side. People who are out of high school and who are working at businesses that need help managing money, understanding investments, and essentially just working towards financial well-being. So in a business side, what are we talking about when we say financial well-being for employees?
Well, the way we at EnRiched Academy kind of look at that is there's different ways you could talk about financial well-being. It could be meeting your current financial needs, whatever they are, if they're mortgage payments, things like that. It could be, having security around your future. But we really try to boil it down. If people are satisfied financially, it really means not having to worry about money. Having the confidence that the money you have is going to meet, again, your immediate needs, and then you've got a plan for the future. And that's what we've surveyed Canadians. We've asked them, what do they want when it comes to money? And it's not making millions of dollars. It's really just, I don't want to worry about money. And that's what we consider, our mission is to make financial freedom accessible to everyone. So the idea that at some point you're on a path that you're not going to have to work for the rest of your life, and that you don't have to worry about money. That would be what we see as somebody with solid, that's financially well off. It's not, again, about a certain amount of money. It's about that lack of worry and stress when it comes to money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of brings in the discussion of what are the benefits to financial well-being, and keeping in mind that this is benefits to your employees, and that's going to start tying into different aspects of your business. But let's start it off with, what are the benefits of financial well-being to these employees?
Yeah, so if you think about it, money impacts so many areas of our lives. It is the number one stress that Canadians face. It's a higher stress than work-related, finance, health. Throughout COVID, people cared and stressed more about money than they did their own personal health. And so there's an impact on mental health. People that are financially stressed, workers that are financially stressed, are more anxious. They worry more about money. There's a physical aspect of financial stress. Canadians that are financially stressed are 4 times likely to suffer from sleep problems. Half of all Canadians say they've lost sleep because of money worries. Heart disease and high blood pressure are linked to financial stress. So that's the physical side. Relationship side too. One of the leading causes of divorces is arguments around money. So it impacts our relationships. And then there's the workplace productivity. Like, there's a real financial cost to employers to have financially stressed employees. And financially stressed employees are 2.5 times more likely to take sick days, so they're not work. When they are at work, there's a lot of study that shows that financially stressed employees take between half an hour to 3 hours per week working on their own personal finances as opposed to their jobs. So there's a significant loss of productivity. So again, if you just think about it, money impacts so many areas of our lives. And so if you've got financially stressed employees, they're not as productive as they could be, and they're stressed, and they're not functioning the way that you would hope they could.
Definitely kind of touches all aspects of life, right? I guess money talks, right? And it can definitely be an issue when it starts going south for an employee. So let's pretend, for example, that I'm an employer right now, and I've got a bunch of employees, and I'm wondering what might be their more common financial stressors that they're facing.
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you're an employer, again, I'll just say this: half of your employees are financially stressed. There's been, the Canadian Payroll Association has done this study going back 13 years, and that number is only going up. And I should put a caveat on that. That was the last numbers that I have was before inflation and interest rates really hit. So I think it's going to be even higher than that. But at least half of your employees are financially stressed. And the most common stresses would be debt. So debt around student loans or credit card debt or mortgages. And this has been, arguably, it's been manageable over the last couple of years because interest rates were so low. But this is spiked, right? The anxiety that we are seeing in the workplace is unlike anything I've seen before, because people are suddenly having to pay 5-6% on a line of credit, or their mortgage is suddenly coming due, and they may have been on a variable mortgage, and suddenly they're paying thousands of dollars more than they did before. So those would be big kind of crisis kind of thing. Then there's low-lying level of stress, I would say. Low level may be downplaying it, around knowing that you're not saving enough, and then kind of thinking about the future and retirement, or maybe thinking about your kids' education, knowing that suddenly you're going to have to, in 5 years' time, pay a fair amount for education and you don't have savings for it. So that whole saving and investing side, if people are struggling with debt, that side is there too. And just so those would be probably, from what we see, debt and then saving for the future. And then underlying all of this is a general unease with not knowing who to turn to as well with this, and knowing there's these problems, of feeling, and we hear it all the time. I'm just not sure if I can trust my financial advisor. Are they really going to be acting in my best interest? And we hear that a lot too.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can get concerned about money, and there's a lot of ways that can impact productivity. So, with an employer, how do you support financial well-being within your workforce?
Yeah, so there are programs out there. We have a program. We're working with unions. We're working with businesses. The RCMP, for example, is an every single RCMP officer is using our program. The Canadian military, we're just in the process of signing a deal with them. I was just speaking at a construction company with about 200 employees here in Ontario, and so there's different ways. Education, again, we think is the key. We think it's important to have engaging education because money can, again, seem to be a very intimidating topic. And then it also has to be timely and easily digestible. So we've got online programs. We do live events. We run webinars. We also do coaching, one-on-one coaching, where they're not sold any products. And so we think it's a combination of that because everyone learns differently. So what might be good for one, like an online 24-hour 24/7 access might be great for certain employees. Other employees might learn better in an event with colleagues or a webinar, or they might prefer some coaching and one-on-one help. So that's really the way we've tailored our program. There's others out there as well, but we think our model seems to be very effective so far.
Yeah, just a quick question. I mean, I think about there's that famous quote from Albert Einstein. He was once asked if there's something he didn't understand, and his response was compound interest. And I think for the average person, a lot of financial stuff can seem almost impenetrable, and particularly with mortgage rates having been so low for so long, and the type of comments that were made to people like, well, if they even go up a few percentage points, it didn't sound like a lot. It actually is a lot. It's a tremendous amount, the increases that have happened lately, where rates are in the 5 to 6% range. So what I was going to ask Kevin is, for the average person, so like one method is sort of some of the programs you're running, but a good source of basic information about some of this, because we don't get it in high school. I know myself, I didn't get a handle on this till I went to business school, and you start doing courses on this, you learn about it, which is great. But coming out of high school, I think none of us really got training in this and learned about these things. You get it from your parents, or not at all, or by the seat of your pants. So are there some basic resources out there people could look at if they're trying to educate themselves on this, to learn more about sort of general financial management, understanding sort of tools that could be available perhaps online or otherwise?
Yeah, no, there's lots of resources. I mean, I first learned about it through The Wealthy Barber. So that's a book, David Chilton, famous book in Canada, one of the top sellers of all time. And he just tells a simple story, kind of breaking down basic personal finance tips. So I often say, if you've got a library card, and everybody, if they live in Canada, will have access to a library, there is a wealth of material out there. The two main areas that I recommend people focus on is getting a handle on your spending first and foremost. I mean, what part of what we teach is it's not rocket science. Spend less than you make, right? But many Canadians don't know where their money's going because they're not tracking it. And again, that can feel boring. It can feel, but it's critical to know. You work so hard for your money, yet you spend, and I say I mean we Canadians, because we tend to overspend. So there are great resources out there. There are free resources, lots of free resources out there. The challenge is those have been there for a while. I really think that there needs to be some, if it's not in the education system, having it injected into some sort of process, because a big part of this is habits, right, Chris? It is the spending habit, the saving habit. Pay yourself first. I mean, that's a very common, been talked about for years, the idea of putting aside every paycheck a certain percentage of your money, so you're paying yourself first, as opposed to the other method, which is pay all the bills, pay everybody else, and then whatever's left over, I'm gonna save. That just doesn't work. So these are, again, I would encourage people. The internet's been very helpful in this front. There are a number of good resources out there. The library, good old-fashioned books, but I think there are. But you have to be intentional about it. I like to say that financial literacy is one of the easiest things to put off. And the excuses, we hear them all the time, I'm not a math person, or I'm not a money person, so this isn't for me. Or I'll do this when I've got a job. We hear this from students. I'll do this when I work, or I'll start to learn this, or I'll do this when I make more money. There's lots of reasons people put it off. Part of it is an intimidation factor. So a big part of what I would also say is that if you start on this, money's really a language. You understand the basics of the language, you can start to be very successful pretty quickly. But you need some help, and that's why there's lots of resources out there, I think, that can help. We run free webinars constantly. We have 1 to 2 webinars a week going on, and so that's another free resource to use.
It's interesting you mentioned The Wealthy Barber. I've read that one. That's a good book. And I think about as well Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and The Millionaire Next Door, a couple others that over
Great
the
books.
years, that you come across like this, and in plain language, right? Because I think that's part of it. Very quickly, this stuff can get heavy,
Yeah.
right? And hard to understand if people don't have training. But those are definitely some materials that are out there that are in plain English that people can understand. And yeah, and really, I heard a story that Chilton, who wrote the book, doesn't use a credit card. Apparently, he has one, but apparently he doesn't use it because he wants to remind himself when he's spending money what he's actually. And I wonder what that's like now. None of us are using cash; we're all using
Right.
debit cards and stuff. But kind of interesting. But yeah, that's some great advice there, Kevin. Thank you.
It does also highlight the importance of how you educate people about money. And like a lot of times in trying to educate employees, you got to be conscious not to just knowledge dump on people, right? So there's a really important aspect of appropriately integrating financial well-being into the conversation on an organizational level. When you're talking to employees, you got to think of ways that you can incorporate that money talk into the discussion, but don't try and cover everything all at once, right?
Yeah, that's great advice, Dyson. We really believe in trying to build a culture of financial wellness, and that takes time, right? This can be, as Chris said, an intimidating topic. I think honestly the banks and the financial institutions maybe overcomplicate things so that people are reliant on them. A big approach that we take is to simplify this language of money and speak to people in a way that they get it and it's engaging. I'll just go back to our foundation as a company. Kevin Cochran, who's our co-founder, he started speaking to high school kids about money because of the financial trouble that he got into. Within 2 years of finishing high school, he was in the workforce and he was $20,000 in credit card debt. Just didn't understand how they worked. But when he got out of that debt, and the way he wanted to give back was go into his local high school and tell kids about money. And he talks about it. Initially, he just was doing a dump of information, and kids were falling asleep, and he was getting angry. He's like, "This is important," and that, but realized he had to speak to them where they were. Like, he was talking about retirement, and most kids think they're going to be dead before they get to retirement, right? Like, that is not going to hit with a 16-year-old. And it's the same with employees. You've got to speak to them where they're at in a language they understand. And I think that's one of the reasons why EnRiched Academy has grown so much, because that's our roots, is figuring out where the people are at that we're speaking to them in a language they can understand, telling them stories and anecdotes. We work with a lot of police officers, for example, and we've heard stories. We know that the rookie officer is the one with the brand new Camaro, the F-150 pickup truck. They got their first check and they're buying a big toy with it, right? And we can kind of talk to them about the dangers of that. But they all laugh, and when they're laughing, their guard's coming down a little bit. So so how you speak to your employees is really important. Being able to speak to them where they're at, and not, like you said, just dumping a whole bunch of information, because it can get their back up and can intimidate them, and they'll just think, okay, again, this isn't for me.
It becomes overbearing, yeah. Which, I mean, that's the other aspect I was kind of wondering about it. That when this stuff gets complicated and you feel overwhelmed, you shut down, and you don't start absorbing that information. You reinforce that negative kind of connotation to discussing finances, planning for your future, and you start kind of tossing it away, which of course is a terrible approach. You don't want that to happen, and you want to, especially for employers, like we've said, you want your employees to be financially sound. You want them to have a strong grasp of their money, how to plan for retirement, which, comes with a bunch of different benefits, right? A better, more consistent retirement, right? When an employer is planning for retirement, they're going to retire on a more consistent, stable basis. And that allows the organization to start planning more appropriately. One of the things that's kind of at the back of my head while we discuss this, though, is what do you do when you have an employee who, for example, struggles with that English barrier, language barrier? What kind of resources can you use to support someone who's has English as a second language and it's not as strong as native speakers, for example, and how do you help that employee to stay on the appropriate level when they're trying to learn about financial literacy?
Yeah, it could definitely be a complicated factor. We work with a lot of new Canadians. Some of the schools we work with are 100% international students, and they're here to learn not only English, but to hopefully stay in Canada. And our numbers are actually, they're our most popular students, like the new Canadians, because I think we're teaching them the Canadian financial system. So I guess that's one way to answer your question, is that there is a real hunger out there for new Canadians. I was actually just speaking with a new Canadian earlier this afternoon, and she said when she came to Canada, where she was from in the Middle East, they didn't have credit the same way we did. And so learning about credit cards, she initially stayed away from credit cards, but then that impacted her because she wasn't building up her credit rating. So I think there is a real hunger for new Canadians to understand this. Sometimes that overcomes the language barrier just by sheer determination. But most of the resources that I think are out there, ours has closed captioning, ours is in multiple languages. So there is resources out there for new Canadians, and then there's a lot of communities that can kind of help with that as well. But it's a good question because I think that is an additional barrier. Yeah,
absolutely. Chris, you got anything else you got any other questions for Kevin?
No, I just say, this is so important. It's really unfortunate. You think about many things as you're saying this, Kevin, like credit cards. One of the things I think that's contributed to that is we all remember being students and seeing the big credit card displays set up at the universities. Somebody could go over and easily apply, and wow, look, I can get $500, and yet people sometimes don't really understand what they're getting into. So I think it really is. It's great that you guys are doing this work because it's so important that people get a handle on this. And obviously, right now with a higher interest rate environment, people are seeing the perils for the first time in a long time of carrying a lot of debt where it was cheap to do that previously, and now they're really feeling the pinch, and particularly for their properties and so on. So really just to say, hats off for the work you're doing, and it's such an important topic. I really encourage anyone who's listening to this, take the time, go out there, read about it, learn about it. It becomes almost like a game after a while, right? When you start learning about these things, you see, okay, can I do a little better? Can I save a little more? Where can I cut costs? And you can get good at it, like anything. And I really like Warren Buffett, and you hear a lot of stuff about Warren Buffett, but it's interesting. A lot of times it's interesting the quotes they pick from him. He has a lot of stuff out there that I think is more sensible than just sort of sophisticated advice. It's like I remember seeing an interview with him a long time ago on 60 Minutes, and he was asked what his advice was for the average person. He said, pay off debt first, because you won't get that rate of return on investment. Right. Basic advice like that, which is along the lines of what you were discussing. So I think there's really good advice out there. People should just start looking into it, take an interest in it, start reading it, much like following a sport or anything like that. And it can really make a big difference over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you for guiding me through it carefully, because boy, was I nervous for this one. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to join you both.
Here to talk to us about financial well-being on the business side of the equation is Matt McDonald, business advisor and national leader of the food and beverage processing practice at MNP. Matt has been working as a trusted advisor for over 15 years and helps clients manage their business and set strategic goals for their personal and professional futures. So, Matt, I'd just like to take a quick moment here to welcome you to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
Yeah. So we were talking before jumping on to this session here, and we were kind of having a look at how to get a bird's eye view of the industry and the businesses in it and talk about financial well-being. And so one of the working analogies we used here was, well, you're either swimming, treading water, or drowning, to generalize and give us a better viewpoint. So just to catch some listeners up, what do businesses that are swimming look like versus businesses that may be drowning?
Yeah, for sure. We talked about that analogy, right? Because it's such a clear picture. You know, we know what drowning looks like, we know what treading water looks like, and we know what swimming looks like. And I think it's pretty universally accepted that we'd all rather be swimming than drowning, and treading water is a lot of work to not move anywhere. And so, you know, when you look at those kind of three buckets and you try to place your business in it, it's really easy kind of from a high level to say, are things getting worse? Is cash flow getting tighter? Are your customers ordering less, sales going down? You know, is the bank on your case around a revolving line of credit, maybe not revolving as much as they like? Is kind of what that drowning bucket might start to look like, right? Where things are just getting worse and you don't really know what to do, but you just know that it keeps getting worse. Treading water, a lot of times it's just that good is good enough mentality, right? Things are okay, but they're not great. You know, you're just kind of stuck, right? Sales are flat, especially in an environment like we have today with high inflation. You're behind the eight ball because your sales are up 5%, but inflation's 6%, right?
Yeah.
And then in swimming, you know, it's things are going great. You have a strong team around you. You're growing the business. Sales are up. You may be into your line of credit a little less than you used to be. There's a clear expansion plan or growth plan, and things are moving well. And really, when you look at those three buckets, I think that the key, not only from a self-assessment perspective, is looking like where you're at, but it's also where you want to be and what are the things that you need to do to move in between those buckets to kind of get to the place that you need to be. And I think if you talk to anybody that was drowning, they really want to be treading water just to start. I don't think that someone that's drowning is expecting that they're going to just start swimming right away. They just want to not be drowning. And so I think that sometimes it's having those realistic goals to say, how do we just stop the bleeding? How do we just level it out? And then once it's stable and level, how do we now move it to the next level?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think when we were talking earlier, you just told me like, no one wants to be drowning. It's not a section you want to be at. I kind of want to get an understanding, I mean, of how businesses tend to move through those buckets. But just before we do that, what do you think the breakdown is for businesses right now? You know, is there a lot more in drowning, a lot more treading water, or succeeding right now, swimming, I guess?
Yeah, like I think a lot of that has to do with what is going on in the wider economy, right? Or what are the industry headwinds, economic headwinds? What are the trends, that are for you or against you at any given time? I think if you would have looked at the food industry in 2020 and 2021, a lot of the issues were around early in COVID, around supply chain and just managing this kind of work from home environment, where now it's less that. It's, we have high interest rates, high borrowing costs, high inflation. Your expenses are up. So it's just a different economic environment that we live in, and that's going to affect different businesses in different ways. And so, that's where a lot of times you can move in between these buckets without even really realizing it, because these are extrinsic forces that kind of play against you. And it's important to have the right team members around you, both internally and externally, to help you to navigate those, to kind of go with the analogy, to navigate those rough waters, right?
Yeah. No, excellent analogy there. So when you're kind of transitioning to those different buckets, what are the things the company should be doing right now to, I suppose, mitigate the risk of going into the drowning section, or going from swimming really confidently to treading water?
Well, I think if you look at what are some of the hallmarks of companies that are drowning, that are not doing well, and it's kind of like, the strategy is don't do those things, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be successful, I think you start by not doing some things. And if you read enough books, you see a lot of times the discipline is doing things, but a lot of times the discipline is not doing other things. And so as it relates to uh, how to kind of get better or sorry, improve your business,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it comes down to what are the metrics that you're using to evaluate your business, right? So from a financial perspective, do you have a dashboard that you're looking at, right? Where you're looking at, depending on what kind of business you're in, if you're in an actual production kind of processing business, what are the metrics that you need to evaluate on your production floor for what it means to be successful? So it's, we're putting out this many pallets a day or a week, or the line is running at this level of capacity. And then what's your sales force look like from demand planning, right? Are we selling everything we're making? Are we coming up short? Do we have overproduction? Like those types of metrics, understanding what they are and being able to look at them on a regular basis and kind of hold yourself accountable for how you're hitting or not hitting those numbers is really a key factor when you're looking at successful businesses, that they have those metrics, they know what they are, and they're holding themselves accountable. It's crazy the number of times where I've seen businesses that are in trouble, really in any industry, and they just don't have a clear understanding of their numbers. They don't know whether they're coming or going. And so, it reminds me of a really good piece of advice that I was given a long time ago with a business that I had, which is just that importance of knowing your numbers, right? How can you make decisions and lead a business if you don't first know your numbers? And one of the things that I hear a lot of times with clients is they'll say, "Well, I'm not an accountant. I don't know numbers. Numbers aren't my thing. I'm really good at selling, or I'm a product development person, or whatever their kind of industry or specialization is." They're not a financial person, and
Mm-hmm.
that's an excuse to some degree. I think that you can staff around that. You have financial people that aren't marketing people, and they hire marketing people, and they
Mm-hmm.
surround themselves with really creative, successful sales and marketing people to help them drive their business. And I would say it's the same thing from a financial and operational perspective, is just making sure that you have a dynamic, strong team around you. Obviously, at a large business, that's really easy because your head counts hundreds of people, thousands of people. So you have the budget to have a really strong team around you. But when it's a small business and it's just you, or just you and three or four or five or 10 other people, you don't have the deep bench strength that some of those larger businesses have. And that's where firms like M&P really play an active role with our clients, is being that bench strength for them, to help them develop those models and those metrics, and be that sounding board. Being an entrepreneur is a pretty lonely life at sometimes. It's pretty lonely life sometimes, and I think it's important that you have that team around you to kind of
Mm-hmm.
navigate what are those KPIs that I need to be looking at, and how do I best ensure that we're hitting the mark.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing up the difference for those small businesses as well, because I mean, they make up the vast bulk of the industry, right? Or roughly 90% of them. And is the resources there are way smaller, in order to get things done, especially complex challenges like trying to track certain metrics for your organization, even though that's such a vital aspect to running a business. And the importance of making data driven decisions is just a requirement these days. You can't just trust your gut. You also have to know that the numbers are on your side, and this is an informed decision. It kind of makes me wonder, if an organization is doing poorly, I imagine they're have to look at certain metrics on their organization. But what are the considerations when things are going very well? Like, it obviously we can look at, okay, well, this company is, for lack of a better word, they're turtling. They're trying to protect everything that they can. But an organization that's doing very well maybe has their mind elsewhere and is looking to expand into different markets, really grow their team perhaps. What should they be looking for in terms of metrics to determine that, like, yes, we can do this and we can do this confidently?
Yeah, well, I think it definitely one of the key things I've seen in businesses that are doing well is not accepting that they've arrived, right? I think you'd be hard pressed to walk into a business that from the outside looks like it's doing really well, and you just find everybody in there with their feet up, right? They have things that they need to accomplish, whether it's increasing margin or expanding into new markets or whatever it is. But I think that the key kind of takeaway there is that no business has ever arrived, right? It's where can we expand? Where can we kind of cut some fat on some of the other areas of the business? Like they're always looking for ways to improve. One of the big things within the food space that I think a lot of people, especially newer entrepreneurs, smaller businesses, really under value is the need for capital. And it's why those bigger businesses seem to just do well, is that they have deep pockets, and partly because they've been around a long time, or they're just really well capitalized. But one of the things that we had talked about before, and it's true, I see it every day, is good product just isn't enough anymore, right? It used to be that if you had the right idea or the right product, it just kind of would fly off the shelves. And that's you have to have good product. You have to have, whether you're selling B2B or B2C, you have to have good product or if you're in the service business, a service, your outcomes have to be top notch. But you need more than that, right? You need a sales plan within the food space, right? You need to understand, what does sell-through look like? How do we get it on the shelves? How much is that going to cost us? How do we manage inventory? How much is that going to cost us? What's our marketing plan to kind of get to the consumer? It's, very, very noisy space in the food industry. There's a lot of competition. So how can you kind of pierce through that noise? You might have the best granola bar ever, but there's a lot of granola bars out there that think that they have the best one as well, right? And so how do you kind of pierce through that noise? And I think that's one thing that larger companies are just set up to be better capitalized. And that's one of the things that I say to entrepreneurs and owners and leaders in smaller businesses, is really just understanding what are your capital requirements in order to do what you want to do. And then going back to your question, what are those opportunities for the big businesses, is as they expand, that's where they can get upside down, because they might have enough capital to keep expanding or keep kind of growing in their spot within the market. But if they say, listen, I want to expand into the US, I want to go international, I want to do this, that, or the other thing, it's a lot of times those are the undoings of larger companies, because they don't do just that. They don't count the cost of that expansion. And I've seen it too many times where there's a good, strong, healthy business and they expand themselves into bankruptcy, just because they haven't really understood what are the requirements from a strategy and a capital and a human team perspective in order for us to kind of climb that mountain. And they underestimate it. And, I'm not a big rock climber, but I know that, if you want to climb Mount Everest, you should make sure you have the right tools and enough oxygen in the tank to do it. And I think a lot of times they kind of rest on their laurels and see that expansion as just something that they can do. And it just doesn't work out. And so I think that kind of counting the cost principle really goes up and down market from big to small, no matter what.
That brings up an interesting point I wanted to ask you. We just went through a really weird time where, supply chains got turned upside down. We had delays, inflation became a big issue, is a big issue for organizations. And if you were to tell someone in 2017 that this was going to happen, their jaw would have hit the floor. Is there contingency plans that organizations should be having, like when they're assessing, whether they're going to be expanding or they're kind of trying to plan out their future here? When they're making these assessments, how do you even prepare for something like that? What do you protect at that point? Because I'm imagining an organization, if they made an expansion into, say, the United States, they're going to start selling, I don't know, yogurt. And all of a sudden we go through 2019 or 2020 to present again. What would a company have done at that point? I would imagine that brings a huge amount of risk at that point. And you've got investments now. Your company is now a little more vulnerable. When you're planning out to do certain things at times when you feel that your organization is secure, what considerations should you make before you do that investment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that that remaining agile is, agile is a bit of a trendy kind of word, but I would just say that if you can kind of get through the rhetoric of it, that kind of variable cost versus fixed cost, being able to kind of respond to market changes and dynamics quickly is a big factor, right? It's why in a very dynamic economy like we have now, a lot of times you can see smaller businesses beating out larger ones because they can pivot quickly. They can see a trend and act on it. They can, see the newest type of beverage, the newest type of flavored water, whatever kind of trend you wanted to kind of grab onto and just act, right? Where when you get into some of these larger multinational beverage companies, they can't just put a new product up. And so it creates opportunity. And one of the things that I would say in that is, if you look at history, not just in the food and beverage industry, but just any industry, the businesses that today we look at as staple businesses, Apple or Microsoft or GE or Ford, or just large businesses, a lot of them were birthed out of volatility and filling a need, right? I remember reading something about Henry Ford, and just he was solving a problem where he kind of creates this car, and historically people had used horses, right? And so the answer that, if you would have asked 100 people back then, how do you go faster? They would have said, well, we need more horses, right? So you have 4 horses on your carriage. If you had 8, you'd go faster. You have to kind of switch gears, switch lanes to kind of get into, well, car is actually way faster than even 50 horses. And so, but that pivoting, if you were a large seller of horses, you're probably not thinking about cars. You're thinking about how to sell more horses. And so, a lot of times that fresh thinking in a very dynamic and volatile economy can be the differentiator for you to become the next whatever, the next Henry Ford. And you see a lot of entrepreneurs solving big problems in agile ways, and just doing the right things at the right time in the right way, and achieving that success over a long period of time. And so that's why I look at the economy right now, and it's really easy to talk about big businesses and what they're doing and how successful they're being. But I think I remain super bullish on the small entrepreneurial business within the food space. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for food entrepreneurs to kind of see the gaps in the market. But again, within the context of what we've already talked about, right? Making sure that they have the right advisors around them, the right capital structure around them. Like, There's a lot of things that the odds are stacked against them, and so they need the right team around them to be able to kind of hurdle those barriers. But I would say that agility piece is a big differentiator for them in today's market for sure.
Yeah, who might that be? For these small businesses, who should be these like quote unquote growth partners that they may be wanting to talk to? I mean, is it people from the bank? Is it business advisors such as yourself? What kind of team, like what elements do they need to bring to their table to make the puzzle pieces fit, I suppose?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's all of those things. It's entrepreneurs that have done it before. There's a number of them out there. I know a bunch of them in the food space that are now investors, accounting firms like M&P. We play a really strong and significant role with our clients in advocating for them, but also just really being that advisor for them on a day-to-day basis. A lawyer, a lot of times as you're getting started with patents and contract agreements and that kind of thing, that's super important. I wouldn't say a bank as much as I would say a financial partner, because a lot of times, when you're starting out, a bank's not going to give you any money, and so a bank is just a bank account. So you need, whether it's seed money or private equity or, kind of friends and family, but having the right financial partner or capital partner, I think is important. And a bank is one of those people, but I would kind of broaden it to a capital partner. And so those are kind of like the areas that you look for an advisor, but I wouldn't say that you need an advisor in every single one of those. You got to be really careful how many people are talking into your life, into your company. So the key really for me, and this is what I tell clients and even a lot of friends in the industry, is trust is super, super critical, right? It's find someone that you trust, that you believe, that has been there before, that understands what they're doing, because you need that person to be there for you when it's hard. And so, sometimes it's 2 or 3 people, sometimes it's only one, but especially when you're getting started or when you're a smaller business, having a couple people that you can call and say, this is my problem, what would you do, right? And if you get seasoned advisors around you, they bring more than just their discipline, right? If you find a strong capital partner, and I've worked with a number of food centric, private equity firms. They're not just the money guys, right? Like they know people at retail. They can help you get listed. They can help you with distribution deals. They understand law, so they can kind of give you some high level, these are the pitfalls to look out for in contract negotiation. Like it's those kind of high level discussions that I think really help, especially when you're kind of new and starting out. And so, but finding the right team to surround yourself externally is, again, I think it's an undervalued piece of growth, and that comes with a cost, right? And that's hard, because when it's thin financially, you got to really watch where you're spending your money. But I do find that the businesses that invest in putting the right people around them in the early days, you can see how those businesses accelerated their growth quicker.
Yeah, they bring insight, right? Like if you're new to it and you just don't understand certain elements, and the worst is when you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that
sure.
feeling is awful.
Sure.
So that they kind of help alleviate that. I'm wondering, like, when the budget is thin, what would you prioritize? I mean, if you were running a small organization in Ontario, Southern Ontario, let's say you're making jerky, and
Yep.
You're just starting off, you feel like you don't fully have a clear picture of the landscape just yet, but you're doing okay. You got like a small margin to work with here, and you want to bring in some advisors. What are you prioritizing in a situation like that?
Well, I think you really need bang for your buck, right? So
Hmm.
whatever meeting you go with a couple boxes of jerky and hope that maybe sets you off on the right foot. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that um, I would say that any one of the kind of areas that I mentioned, if you find the right person, the advisory stuff should come, right? Because
Hmm.
if you find the right person, they've been there before, they know what they're doing, and so that's kind of like you should interview that out, right? Figure out, do you believe that these people know what they're doing and can help you? I would say, the accounting piece for me is I see it probably as that first move, and what I see the most in the clients that we work with, just because they do need their financial statements done, they do need their tax returns done, like that compliance side, it drives behavior versus a lot of stuff it's like more nice to have. And so some of it is just finding, the right partner for you to work with that sees the opportunity too, right? Maybe can can work with you on cost efficiency and what are the things that we can do to manage the costs in those early days. Um, uh, but I would say that generally speaking, I see that accounting role as a pretty key early role. Um, and then I would say the capital piece of it, just because that's driving the growth, right? If you need to invest in significant machinery or sales process and people, that costs money. And so if you're coming with a bit of a shoestring budget, finding that capital partner really can accelerate your growth. I would say those are the two ones. A lot of it too is technology, right? Like technology has come so far with QuickBooks Online and automation from a bookkeeping perspective that sometimes it's just finding the right pragmatic advisors to say, you know, this is a solution that you can put in that actually doesn't cost as much money because technology has just made it that much more accessible to all areas of the industry, right? I have a lot of clients on QuickBooks Online. There's a lot of automation that's now offered that used to be manual, right? So you think about what that's done to those kind of from a cost savings perspective. But again, you need to have that right partner that can kind of point you from a trust perspective, point you in the right direction. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's technology would be another thing that I would say is important to invest in as you grow. There's a lot of underinvestment within the food and beverage space. I talk about that. I've talked about that at a few other associations. Just the need for those medium-sized businesses to start investing in technology, automation. Looking at their tech stack. We do a lot of work in the kind of ERP, CRM space at M&P. We have a pretty dynamic team in that area that we see a lot of businesses that have underinvested in those areas, and really that's going to be a key differentiator in those treading water to swimming businesses in the next 5 years. Is those businesses that have invested in technology that are, they're able to be more efficient and drive higher gross margin internally because they have strong data, strong technology, the right people, and it just makes them that much more competitive.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have a role where I was either implementing a CRM at an organization for the first time. Um, Coincidentally, we did something like that just before the pandemic hit, and it was the only reason we were able to keep running.
Mm-hmm.
Working remotely, all these different technological aspects had to tie together, and then something happened where we couldn't come to the office. But fortunately, we were able to keep working the business
Mm-hmm.
without having any disruption to clients. But that's an excellent point. You really do get an aspect of, especially for the smaller organizations, the technology is almost a opportunity to break through the pack and really just become really efficient,
Mm-hmm.
if you manage to get good at it.
Yeah.
The CRMs is a perfect example that you brought up, right? You've got the ability now not just to track sales, for example, different touch points of your business from a customer's perspective. But now you have outreach to them. You have a swath of data now that can help you inform your decisions, recognize where there's opportunities in your business versus where there's weaknesses. So that's an excellent point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even more than that is like kind of like that next level of kind of opportunity threat is cybersecurity, right? And again, I think that's a big thing that that a lot of small and medium sized businesses think is a big business problem, and we're seeing it be, it's everybody's problem, and I've seen a number of clients and industry folks just get ripped off by through a cyber attack, and it's a real threat to any business today. And I would say, unfortunately, I've seen it be a catalyst for moving from one bucket to the another bucket in the wrong direction, right? If you think about a business that was making a couple $100,000 a year and doing, and let's say treading water, they were just doing okay, and then they get ripped off for a couple $100,000 from a cybersecurity incident. That's going to put them in a really bad spot, and it could have been avoided just with that planning and the right people around you. So I think that's what we talked about at the outset. There's a lot more than just good looks and hard work to get to move your business forward, right? The reality is there are extrinsic forces that can play a significant role. You look at the pandemic changed a lot of dynamics. The supply chain issues, pallet shortages, labor shortages. These are all macroeconomic trends that it doesn't really matter how good your product is. There are trends out there that are affecting every business every day that could move your business from kind of good to bad without giving you notice. And so that's part of why I keep kind of hammering that team approach, is having the right people around you, again, both internally and externally. Having, if you're a medium-sized business, having a good controller, CFO, having a strong production leader, having those right people on your team around you to kind of raise flags where they're seeing it in their respective areas, right? This is a threat. How are we mitigating it? Because again, as I said, gone are the days where good product wins the day on its own.
Yeah, I take your point there, because the adaptability aspect is just, I mean, with the pallet shortage, for example, that you mentioned, as well as like glass shortages, there's the BC strike, the BC port strike. That was, I think I was just reading earlier, that was like 13 days and affected like $9.6 billion worth of product. There's no shortage of issues that can affect your business. So, I mean, adaptability really is just absolutely critical. I did have a question, and it ties a little into this, and it does tie into something we were talking about earlier. But I mean, when we were talking about expanding into different markets, for example, and I'm not necessarily tying the question to like, okay, well, imagine a business expanding in a new market, but it also comes into protecting your organization. When you make a move, should you be assessing, if this messes up, I have to be able to cut that limb off? So for example, like, and just as an example, because this is applicable everywhere, but like if for example, you're going to make a big investment somewhere else, you're going to open up a new facility or something. When you make that decision, do you have to assess it as, if this goes belly up, I will still be able to tread water? Or is there an inherent risk involved with an investment that you have to accept?
Yeah, so there's always a risk, right? as you're talking there, the example kind of that came to mind is Target, right? So when Target came into Canada, that didn't go well. They came in
Yeah.
and it just didn't go very well, and then they
Hmm.
pulled out. And so Target lost a lot of money when they did that, but they're still around and they're still a dominant retailer in the U.S. and in across every industry, right? They
Hmm.
kind of just sell everything. And so how did they do that? Well, I wasn't in the room when they were deciding how they were going to do it. Um, but I do think that they, to your point, figured out how, from a structural perspective, from an onboarding perspective, how do we onboard this opportunity, but keep it kind of within our atmosphere, within our ethos, but far enough out that if it doesn't go well, we can cut our losses and get out. But I guess my point from that kind of second level would be there were still losses. So you still had to be big enough to absorb those losses. And I would say that a lot of times you see businesses that they might even do it structurally well, but they didn't count that cost of, okay, we're going to expand in the US. And if it doesn't go well, we could lose $1 million. Well, if we lost $1 million, what would that do to our Canadian business? And if the answer is it would cripple it, you should probably not, launch it in the way that you're thinking. And so the bets that Target made when they came to Canada weren't so big that they crippled the U.S. business. They were. It's almost like gambling, right? It's like you can afford to put $5 down, on the table, because if you lost it, you're not like, it's not going to break you. But if you
Hmm.
put this month's rent payment down on the table and you lost it, that's going to be a problem for you. And so I look at it the same way within expansion is what's the quantitative and qualitative risk to you and your business by the expansion, and can you absorb the loss if it didn't go as planned?
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate you answering that, because that was one I know we would have people asking about, because it's such a, I'd imagine it's exciting, but it's also a little terrifying at the same time.
Yeah. And I've worked with lots of businesses that have expanded into the US, and they've done it well, and it's gone well. And so I'm not saying it from a doomsday approach saying this isn't going to work. It's just more of it's really easy to stack up the money that you're going to make when you expand. But a lot of times people don't, look at the coin on the opposite side too, is to quantify the risk of what you could lose. And so that's just good business. Like that's just good management and strategy from the perspective of, um, understanding what those risks are and how they balance the rewards out. Right. If I said to you, I have an investment opportunity and you can make 80% of your money uh, back, but there's a 60% chance that you'll get nothing. Well, that's different than like that second line changed the first line, right?
Yeah.
I'd love it. I love an 80% return. That sounds great. But if you tell me that there's a 60% chance that I'll lose all of it, I don't think I love it as much.
Yeah. No, it's got to be a comfort thing as well. And yeah, I know it's good business, and the way you describe it, it's almost like this is common sense type of insurance that you should almost consider it like insurance. It's there to protect you if it goes wrong. That you take the steps to assess your organization and the consequences of something, an investment going wrong, and how that affects your organization, and
Mm-hmm.
just play that through your head, and play it through with your team, um, and just make sure that everyone kind of has a clear picture of what can go wrong, and what the contingency plan is in that situation. I mean, so the Target example was perfect. So I guess, we've kind of had a quick look here. I really appreciate it. I just, before we end this and we sign out here, I just wanted to know, did you have what kind of advice would you give organizations right now, who are trying to navigate in this kind of environment? what do you tell clients if you've had the opportunity to tell them just one thing? What do you think that would be?
I would say focus on that agility piece and knowing your numbers, right? So really understand where are you at, and do a real mirror check on this is where our business is at today, and how can we be more agile? So how can we, be in a position where we have the ability to capitalize on the opportunity. I think that we're right at the beginning here of some significant opportunities, and unfortunately, that kind of also means that some people are not gonna. It's not gonna work out, right? There's gonna be some bankruptcies. There's gonna be some rough waters here, but for the businesses that are ready and capitalized, that's their opportunity. And so I would just say, you want to be in that column, not in that last one where you're kind of drowning. And so it's get yourself up above the water, and be agile, know your numbers, and get ready for opportunity, because I think there's going to be a bunch here.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you got to build a good team around yourself. So before we hop off here, Matt, how can people reach out to you if they want to know more?
Yeah, so I always love talking with more people from the industry and the food space. So you can check us out on our website, www.mnp.ca, or email me, matt.mcdonald@mnp.ca. I think both of those will be down in the comments section here.
Yeah, we'll have it in the description. So just hit read more for anyone who wants to get more information on that. All right. Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and I really appreciate the insight. It's been a great discussion, and hopefully for our listeners there, they'll stay agile.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much. It was great to be here, and always appreciate what FBO does for its members and just the support it provides to the industry. And just grateful for this opportunity.
That's all for today's show. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next month for our next segment on Food and Beverage Processor Forum, brought to you by Food and Beverage Ontario. Take care, everyone.